There's no question in my mind that I'm a romantic at heart. I love romance. I love passion. I love characters risking it all for one another. I love those classic kind of stories. And you can call me old fashioned or cliche if you like, but those are the kind of stories I love the most. And I know this because it always falls into my earliest work. And my earliest stories, like the ones I wrote when I was either in high school or just starting in college, I can always notice those tropes popping up in my work. And one of the first stories I ever wrote, one that I have no interest of publishing, but it was one of the first stories I wrote when I was a sophomore or junior in high school, was called Battleline. Now, this story is a short story. I think it was only 5 or 6 parts long, but the story is about as classic as it can get. You've got this main character who is a kickboxer, because at the time I was training in martial arts. I was training to fight, and so I wanted to tell the story of a fighter, but not just any fighter. He's fighting for a purpose. He has entered this kickboxing tournament. He's entered this fight because he has a goal. There is this girl that he is really in love with. He really cares about her, but she is suffering from a disease or some kind of ailment. I can't remember exactly now what it was that I wrote, but she was dying, and he wanted to help her pay her hospital bills so that she could live a little longer, and he wanted to earn the money necessary from the tournament to get it. And the story was about him entering his final match before he won the tournament to save her. And of course, as the hopeless romantic I am, of course, through thick and thin, he overcomes the obstacle in front of him. He beats the guy and manages to save her life. And it has a little twist in it where he ends up in the hospital because of the fight, where he's all beat up. And while he's laying in bed, he wonders if it was all worth it. Only for a day or two later, she comes in out of her hospital room to come and see him and reveal that she's going to be able to go through with the operation, and she's so glad that he's okay, but says you should never do that again. It's a classic romance story, and you might say, God, Raven, that is so cliche, it hurts. Well, you know what? Those are the kind of stories I live and breathe for. They're what got me into writing in the first place, because I am a hopeless romantic. Now, obviously, when I do these kind of videos, I want to talk about the good and the bad. And when I look back on this story, Battleline, the first thing that I want to say is that there was some good in it. It really got me writing combat stories. This was one of the first stories I wrote where there was actual fighting, like where there was a character fighting for something, or in a physical confrontation. And I got to apply my experience as a martial artist in this story. I got to write movements. I got to practice writing reactions and movement and patterns of movement and stuff like that, like how to write down throwing a punch, not just and then he threw a punch. No, he moved his body into it. He shifted his hips. He pivoted on his ankle, that kind of thing. Like, I worked out how to write these things in a more descriptive manner. And of course, the story itself is weak in that regard, but it taught me to keep an eye out for those things. So while I can't say it was written well, it helped me realize this is important. I should never write, and then he punched him in the face, and then he kicked him in the shin, and then he kneed him in the chest. No. You got to write in more descriptive detail. I also wrote how to write pain this way. Like, I learned how to write better pain reaction. Like, not just, and then it hurt. No. Or, and then he started bleeding. No, but the shock of the pain, the realization of the punch to the teeth, or the sudden realization of a kick to the leg and how it hurts and how that pain impacts you. Stuff like that. It really did teach me how to better look out for those kind of things and how to improve as a writer in those areas. But if we talk about the bad of the story, oh man, where do you get started? First of all, like I said, cliche. I also think another problem was that 3 of the 4 or 5 parts of the story were the same fight. I drug out the fight for several parts when I probably could have just kept it all down to 1 part and instead focused more on the relationship between the kickboxer and his girlfriend and try to build up that relationship. But at the time, I was invested in the fight itself, in the actual battle against all odds to save someone else. And I think that I needed to spend more time on the relationship more than the fighting. But keep in mind, I wrote this when I was a sophomore in high school or something. Like, I was very young, and it was one of my first ever stories. And I mean that, one of my first ever stories. The first story I ever wrote, the very first story I ever wrote was Stupendous Boy, back when I was in middle school. It was Stupendous Boy. That was my first ever story. I wrote this when I was actually trying to do something unique and interesting. And I can't say that it was a success, but it did kick me off and start me on the path to writing these kind of stories. I am proud of it. I am proud of how the story came out, in a sense, because it helped me realize where I could go with romance-style writing. But, you know, the classic story of the fighter fighting to win the money to save his girlfriend, come on, we've seen this story before. But there's a reason we've seen this story before, because for people like me, us hopeless romantics, it's what we crave. So rereading Battleline made me cringe a few times, but it also made me smile because it made me remember, yeah, a lot of what I write does come down to that. But I wanted to share this too. It is another story sharing adventure from my past. Thought I'd get this out there. Thank you guys for watching, as always, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.